It's a staggering thing. This reflects just does nothing more than reflect what the President of the United States of America has said.
Since 1949, NATO countries have agreed an attack on one of them is seen as an attack on all. This is Article 5 of the NATO treaty. But what happens when the threat is internal, when one ally threatens another? The most powerful, the US, threatens one of the least powerful, Denmark. Donald Trump says he'll take over Greenland one way or another. He's threatening to put tariffs on European countries for insisting that Greenland is part of the Danish kingdom and must remain so. At the end of last week, the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney mentioned Article 5 when saying NATO would protect Greenland.
The future of Greenland is a decision for Greenland and for the Kingdom of Denmark. We are NATO partners with Denmark, and so our full partnership stands. Our obligations on Article 5, Article 2 of NATO stand, and we stand full square behind those.
Yeah, it's important he mentioned that. Let's talk to General Sir Richard Shirreff. He's the former NATO Deputy Supreme Allied Commander for Europe. Richard, morning to you.
Morning, Steve.
How big a moment are we facing, do you think, when we think about the security of the West?
This is massive. This is the moment things have changed fundamentally. And I don't think you can underestimate the scale and the potential of implications that could follow from this.
Is it the sort of future of NATO?
It's absolutely the future of NATO. As you've said very graphically, you've got NATO's lead nation threatening the territorial integrity of another NATO ally. And don't forget, it's already threatened Canadian territorial integrity.
Yeah.
And that places the whole issue of an alliance based on values of liberty, freedom, democracy, the rule of law, and collective defense, and above all, trust, completely in jeopardy.
I want to read you a letter that it's being shared by respected journalists. The White House hasn't confirmed this on the record, but it's apparently a letter from Donald Trump to the Prime Minister of Norway, Jonas Gahr Store. He says, "Dear Jonas, considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, although it will always be predominant, but can now think about what is good and proper for the United States of America." So do we have to actually conceive of the notion that he might have a military design on Greenland? He keeps saying it, and everyone says, he doesn't really mean it, doesn't really mean it. Do you think we actually have to accept that he might mean it?
Yes. We have to, and we should have been doing this for over a year, but we have to recognize that with Trump, and indeed with Putin, we have to assume the worst case is going to happen and prepare for it. That's the first point. The second point is that appeasement simply does not work. We have to push back. And again and again in the last year, NATO has done all it can desperately to try to hang on to Trump's coattails, and it has failed. And now the rubber has absolutely hit the road, and appeasement cannot work, must not work. European members of NATO and Canada have got to stick together. Their unity is fundamental. And of course, what Trump is going to do is try and divide and rule through the tariffs. I mean, we heard this morning Britain looking for a carve-out. At the expense of what? At the expense of everything, if you do that.
So you say we shouldn't be looking for a carve-out, shouldn't be saying to, oh, please don't punish us because we're really on your side.
We should be saying, if you are threatening a NATO ally, we are going to, exactly as Prime Minister Carney just said then, we are NATO partners and we will support Denmark with whatever needs to be done.
But we can't fight a war with America.
That the Americans can apply.
But I mean, so what would happen? I mean, let's try and wargame this a little bit then, Richard, because Americans say we claiming Greenland. They send a force of, even if it's just a token force to Greenland, and they plant a flag in Greenland and say we now have Greenland.
Well, that's exactly what NATO should be now doing. Exactly that, wargaming the worst potential case scenarios and being ready to take whatever measures to head them off. Now, it's not easy. Of course, it's not easy. It's extraordinarily complicated. The fact that America has underpinned European security for so long, that underpinning is going to be removed very likely at a stroke. In fact, it has already gone. We need to recognize that. And we need, as Europeans, together with Canada, to fast track everything that needs to be done to build up our capabilities. It's not just about, and it's, the wider implications. We should not forget the major implication of this is on the existential war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Because if NATO collapses into smithereens because it's been divided and ruled by the bully, then Putin has open house.
But do we then have to create a new NATO then without America? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I'm absolutely sure we've got to think about that. I don't necessarily think it's a new alliance, but it is an alliance built on the structures, the legacy, the capabilities, the doctrine, the command structure of the existing NATO alliance.
Again, just to go back to Greenland, does that mean we need to put some European troops on Greenland to make it impossible for America to go on there without open conflicts? We don't really believe that America would want that. We have to
We should call the bluff. Trump is rampaging around about the threat of aggression on Greenland from China and Russia. Europe and Canada should put troops into Greenland, assuming the Danes agree, and they must take the lead, of course, to counter and to deter any aggression, whether it's Russian, Chinese, or indeed American.
And let's just pause to reflect on that statement coming from you, who used to be very senior in NATO. The idea that the aggression could come from Russia or China, people would understand. But the fact that you're now saying America in the same breath as those two countries is quite the thing, isn't it?
It's a staggering thing. This reflects... this just does nothing more than reflect what the President of the United States of America has said.
And we have to take him seriously.
We have to take him seriously. As I go back to my point, we have to assume with Trump that the worst than worst case will happen. What is the worst case? That America uses military force against Denmark. We have to be ready for that.
Do we rethink the whole issue of defence in this country? That we were talking about this to James Cartledge, the Shadow Defence Secretary. This idea that we have to recognise that we are a country on the verge of war, and the war is coming to us from Russia. We can no longer rely on America. Therefore, how much we spend on military is one thing. How we regard our contribution to civil society might mean national service. It might mean that we have to see ourselves as being part of a continent that is under massive threat, and we have to reshape our own expectations of the state as a result of it.
Stig, we have to recognise that we have been at war with Russia since 2014. That's not me talking. That is what the Russians believe. They have been conducting, clearly not a conventional war, but a covert war, a war designed to undermine the integrity of the alliances and countries they face, i.e. NATO, by means of cyber, manipulation of minorities, sabotage, espionage, assassination, overflights of aircraft, attacks against Poland by attacks on Poland by drones. Russia believes it is at war with NATO and the West, and we need to adopt a completely different mindset in order to deter the worst case, which is conventional war. And unless we do that, we may well face that worst case.
Yeah, that's they're very stark words from you this morning, Richard. I'm sure many people will be pausing to think about their implications. Great to speak to you as ever. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you very much.
That's General Sir Richard Shirreff there, the former NATO Deputy Supreme Allied Commander for Europe, saying that we need to put European forces on Greenland to deter all enemies of NATO, which might include China, it might include Russia, and it might include the United States of America.
And just for, I suppose, a bit of a recap, really, in the hours before we came on air this morning, so I think between 4 and 5 o'clock this morning, we had the latest from Donald Trump in which he said it will be done. No clarity on what it means. In the last half an hour, we've seen a letter published. It is, it is incredibly stark. It is to the Prime Minister of Greenland. It came, as we understand it, via the ambassador. There's a note at the top saying, "Dear Ambassador, President Trump has asked the following message be shared with the Prime Minister to be forwarded by your," and then named head of government. The letter reads, and Stig read out some of it, it's quite short. It says, "Dear Jonas, considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, in capital letters, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, although it will always be predominant. but can now think about what is good and proper for the United States of America. Denmark cannot protect that land from Russia or China. And why do they have a right of ownership anyway? There are no written documents. It's only that a boat landed there hundreds of years ago, but we had boats landing there also. I've done more for NATO than any other person since its founding, and now NATO should do something for the United States. The world is not secure unless we have complete and total control of Greenland. Thank you to the president of
to Norway. Who's Norwegian Prime Minister.
Norwegian Prime Minister.
Jonas Gahr Store. And that line again, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace. If you think Richard Shirreff there was sort of talking... scaring the horses there where he didn't need to. You have the President of America saying, I no longer think in terms of peace.
But it's also that bit there about, you said you had a boat landing there hundreds of years ago, but we had boats there too. I mean, it's a completely bizarre territorial argument now. I mean, it's gone beyond the we need it for defence. It's much beyond that.
It takes you back to the old theory of empire, the British theory of empire, which is we are better, more morally qualified to run your country than you are. That's how empires begin. You effectively have an empire is when a country believes it has some sort of right to another country because it will be better for those inhabitants there. That's what fueled the British Empire. It fueled the Roman Empire as well. That's imperial talk coming out of the President of America.
And it comes just, less than an hour now until we hear from the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, who was already in a fairly difficult position. And we've heard some of the doubts about, the European response to this may well be sanctions on America. It would cost the EU dear. It would cost German manufacturers incredibly. I mean, there's some real concern about what it would do to EU nations. But the suggestion that the UK might look for a carve-out and might try and avoid that collective action in order to get a better deal. I suppose the question now is that really the right position for the UK morally and collectively?
And that's what Richard Shirreff was saying. Exactly. It absolutely wasn't.
Yeah.